She inherited $50 million when she was just 5 years old. That's nearly $1 billion in today's money. By the time she was 20, Barbara Hutton was one of the wealthiest women in the world, with access to more money than she could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. The press called her the poor little rich girl, and she had everything anyone could ever want: mansions in Paris, London, and New York, private jets, jewelry collections that would make royalty jealous, the ability to buy literally anything her heart desired. But when Barbara Hutton died at the age of 66, she had less than $3,000 to her name. Everything was gone: the mansions, the jewels, the fortune that seemed impossible to lose. She spent her final years alone in a hotel room, surviving on donations from former staff members who pitied her. 7 marriages, 7 divorces, and a trail of men who took everything she had while claiming to love her. So, how does someone born into that much wealth end up dying completely broke? How do you go from being one of the richest women in America to having nothing? The answer is more heartbreaking than you might think, because Barbara Hutton's story isn't really about money at all. It's about loneliness, desperation, and the price of never learning to trust the right people. If you're interested in stories about the rise and fall of famous figures, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We're just getting started. Barbara Woolworth Hutton was born on November 14th, 1912, in New York City. Her grandfather was Frank Winfield Woolworth, the founder of the Woolworth retail empire. You probably know the name. Woolworth stores were everywhere in America during the early 1900s, selling everything from clothing to household goods at prices working class families could afford. Frank Woolworth became one of the richest men in the country, and when he died, he left behind a fortune that would be worth billions today. Barbara should have had everything: wealth, privilege, a loving family to guide her through life. But from the moment she was born, tragedy followed her like a shadow. Her mother, Edna Woolworth Hutton, struggled with severe depression and mental health issues that nobody in the family wanted to acknowledge. Back then, mental illness was something you hid, not something you treated. Edna tried to cope, but the pressure of being part of one of America's wealthiest families was too much for her to handle. When Barbara was just 4 years old, her mother committed suicide. The official story was that it was an accident, but everyone knew the truth. Barbara's father, Franklin Laws Hutton, was a cold and distant man who cared more about his business interests than raising a traumatized little girl. He remarried quickly and shipped Barbara off to be raised by nannies and governesses, while he focused on expanding his own fortune. Barbara grew up, surrounded by wealth, but starved for affection. She had servants, tutors, and every material comfort imaginable, but what she really wanted was someone to love her unconditionally. By the time she turned 5, Barbara inherited $50 million from her grandfather's estate. It made headlines around the world. The richest little girl in America, they called her. Newspapers ran stories about her lavish lifestyle, her expensive toys, the custom-made dresses she wore. But nobody wrote about the loneliness. Nobody talked about how she cried herself to sleep at night, wondering why her mother had left her and why her father didn't seem to care. As Barbara grew older, the isolation only got worse. She attended the finest private schools, where other students either resented her wealth or pretended to be her friend just to get close to her money. She never knew who genuinely liked her and who was just using her. That fear of being used would haunt her for the rest of her life, and, ironically, it would make her even more vulnerable to the very people she should have avoided. Before we continue with Barbara's story, if you're enjoying this content, please take a second to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. By the time Barbara was in her early 20s, she was stunningly beautiful, tall, elegant, with delicate features and a sense of style that made her a fixture in high society magazines. She traveled the world, attended the most exclusive parties, and had access to circles that most people could only dream about. Everywhere she went, men pursued her: princes, aristocrats, actors, playboys. They all wanted Barbara Hutton. But Barbara didn't want their titles or their fame. She wanted love. Real, unconditional love. The kind of love she never received from her parents. The kind of love that would make her feel like she mattered as a person, not just as a walking bank account. Unfortunately, she had no idea how to tell the difference between someone who loved her and someone who loved her money. Her first marriage came in 1933, when she was just 21 years old. She married Prince Alexis Madavani, a Georgian prince who was charming, handsome, and completely broke. Alexis came from a noble family that had lost everything during the Russian Revolution. He and his brothers had reinvented themselves as fortune hunters, targeting wealthy American heiresses and convincing them that marrying into European royalty was the ultimate achievement. Barbara fell for it completely. She believed that Alexis loved her for who she was, not what she had. She gave him $1 million trust fund as a wedding gift. She bought him cars, jewels, estates. She paid off his debts and funded his lavish lifestyle. Within 2 years, Alexis had drained a significant portion of her wealth, and when Barbara finally realized he had never loved her, she filed for divorce. But instead of learning from the experience, she convinced herself that she had just picked the wrong man. The next one would be different. The next one would truly love her. She was wrong. After Alexis, Barbara married Count Kurt von Haugwitz Reventlow, a Danish nobleman who was slightly less obvious about his intentions but just as interested in her money. They had a son together, Lance, but the marriage was miserable. Kurt was controlling and emotionally abusive. He spent her money freely while criticizing her for being spoiled and wasteful. When that marriage ended, Barbara gave Kurt a generous divorce settlement, hoping to move on and find happiness with someone new. But the pattern was already set. Barbara would meet a man who seemed charming and attentive. She would fall in love quickly, desperate to believe that this time it was real. She would marry him, shower him with money and gifts, and then watch as he revealed his true nature. Some were cruel, some were indifferent, some were kind but ultimately more interested in her fortune than in building a genuine partnership. And with each failed marriage, Barbara's desperation grew. Her third marriage was to Cary Grant, the famous Hollywood actor. This one seemed different at first. Cary Grant was already a star. He had his own career, his own fame, his own money. But even Cary Grant couldn't resist the allure of Barbara's wealth. The marriage lasted less than 3 years, and when it ended, Cary walked away with a substantial settlement. Years later, he would admit that marrying Barbara had been a mistake, but by then, Barbara had already moved on to husband number 4. Then came Prince Igor Trubetskoy, a Russian aristocrat. Then Porfirio Rubirosa, a Dominican diplomat and notorious playboy who was simultaneously married to Barbara while carrying on affairs with multiple other women. Rubirosa was perhaps the most blatant gold digger of them all. He married Barbara, spent her money on cars and clothes and gambling debts, and left her within a year. Barbara gave him a reported $2.5 million in the divorce settlement, along with several properties and a stable of polo horses. By this point, the public had stopped feeling sorry for Barbara. The newspapers mocked her. Comedians made jokes about her failed marriages. People called her foolish, naive, desperate. But what they didn't understand was that Barbara wasn't stupid. She was traumatized, she was lonely, and she was surrounded by people who saw her as an opportunity, not as a human being. With each failed marriage, Barbara's mental health deteriorated. She started drinking heavily to numb the pain. She developed addictions to prescription pills that doctors prescribed far too freely. She surrounded herself with enablers who encouraged her worst habits because it made her easier to control. Her son Lance grew up watching his mother fall apart, and their relationship became strained. He resented her for choosing her latest husband over him again and again, and Barbara, in her pain, couldn't see the damage she was causing. Her sixth marriage was to Baron Gottfried von Kram, a German tennis champion. It lasted less than a year. Her seventh and final marriage was to Doan Vin Na Champasak, a Laotian prince who was decades younger than her. By this point, Barbara was in her 50s. Her health was failing, and her fortune was almost completely gone. The Laotian prince, like all the others, took what he could and left. But it wasn't just the husbands who drained Barbara's wealth. She was extraordinarily generous to everyone around her. She gave lavish gifts to friends, staff members, and even strangers. She funded charities, bought properties she never lived in, and spent money impulsively on things she didn't need. Part of it was genuine kindness. Part of it was a desperate attempt to buy affection from people who would never truly care about her. As the years passed, Barbara's fortune evaporated. The $50 million inheritance that had seemed limitless was gone. The real estate had been sold off. The jewelry had been pawned. The trust funds had been depleted. And Barbara, who had never worked a day in her life and had no idea how to manage money, found herself completely broke. Barbara Hutton spent her final years living in a suite at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Los Angeles. She could no longer afford the grand estates she had once owned. She survived on small donations from former employees who remembered her kindness during better times. Her health was destroyed from decades of alcohol and drug abuse. She was frail, weak, and suffering from multiple chronic illnesses. She rarely left her hotel room. The woman who had once been photographed on the arms of princes and movie stars now spent her days alone, watching television and waiting for visitors who rarely came. Her son Lance had distanced himself from her, unable to watch her self destruction anymore. Her so called friends had all disappeared the moment her money ran out. The people who had once fought for her attention now wanted nothing to do with her. On May 11th, 1979, Barbara Hutton died of a heart attack. She was 66 years old. When her estate was settled, it was revealed that she had less than $3,500 to her name. The woman who had inherited $50 million, who had lived in palaces and owned priceless jewels, died with almost nothing. Barbara Hutton's story is a tragedy in every sense of the word. It's easy to look at her life and think she was foolish for giving away so much money to people who clearly didn't love her. It's easy to judge her for marrying 7 times, for not learning from her mistakes, for letting herself be used over and over again. But that judgment misses the point entirely. Barbara was born into a world that valued her for her money, not for who she was as a person. From the moment she inherited that fortune at age 5, people saw her as a transaction, not as a human being. She grew up without the love and stability that every child needs, and she spent her entire life trying to fill that void by buying affection from people who would never genuinely care about her. Her story is a reminder that money cannot buy happiness, and more importantly, it cannot buy love. Barbara had everything that society tells us should make a person happy: wealth, beauty, access to the most exclusive circles in the world. But none of it mattered because she never had the one thing she truly needed, which was someone who loved her unconditionally. The men who married her saw an opportunity. They saw a wealthy, lonely woman who was desperate for companionship, and they exploited that desperation for their own gain. Some were more obvious about it than others, but the end result was always the same. They took what they could and left her worse off than they found her. And perhaps the saddest part of Barbara's story is that she knew. Deep down, she knew that most of these men didn't truly love her, but she convinced herself that maybe, just maybe, the next one would be different. That hope kept her going through 7 marriages, through decades of loneliness, through the slow erosion of her fortune. And when she finally died, broke and alone, that hope died with her. Barbara Hutton was called the poor little rich girl for a reason. She had all the money in the world, but she was poor in the ways that actually matter. Poor in love, poor in genuine relationships, poor in the kind of emotional support that money simply cannot buy. Her life is a cautionary tale about the dangers of wealth without wisdom, about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who value you for who you are rather than what you have. If there's a lesson to take from Barbara's story, it's this: money can provide comfort and security, but it cannot replace human connection. It cannot heal childhood trauma. It cannot protect you from people who want to exploit you. And it certainly cannot buy you love, no matter how much you're willing to spend. Barbara Hutton deserved better. She deserved parents who loved her, friends who valued her, and partners who saw her as more than just a bank account. Instead, she got a life of loneliness, exploitation, and heartbreak that ended with her dying alone in a hotel room with almost nothing to her name. If this story affected you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might find it interesting, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.